Hi, I'm Aditya Agarwal, and welcome to the Minus One podcast, where we ask the most interesting people in the world about the times in their lives where they've had to answer the question that we all eventually struggle with, which is what's next? Because before you launch at zero, you have to decide what to launch at minus one. And I'm your host, Aditya Agarwal. I'm a partner at South Park Commons, and I'm joined this week by my co-host, Jonathan Brebner, another one of our partners at SPC.
Thanks, Aditya. We're both very excited today to be joined by someone we're very proud to call an SBC alumni, an early member of SBC, and perhaps more interesting, a two-time Olympic gold medal decathlete, Ashton Eaton. In addition to being one of the very few people in the world who has a legitimate claim to having been, at least at one point, the most athletic person on the planet, Ashton has also joined SBC back in 2018 to navigate the transition out of professional athletics. So, Ashton, thanks for joining us.
Super awesome to be here. Very flattered for the intro. And also, when you say those things, I'm like, did that really happen? 'Cause definitely don't feel that athletic anymore.
Oh, no, you did it, man. You did it.
I mean, unless a lot of people are making things up and Wikipedia is just extremely inaccurate, you still very much have a prominent place there.
I mean, can I just say the Silicon Valley line here, which is like, listen, Ashton, if you do it once, you're good. If you do it twice, you're legendary. Okay. Yes. So I think you kind of fit the second part.
I love it.
I want to start with a very specific kind of minus one moment. And one of the reasons I actually like the minus 1 to 0 analogy is that it works kind of in reference to the concept of a countdown, right? Like T minus 10, 9, 8 down to a rocket launch, or kind of those moments right before, say, the starting gun of an athletic competition, right?
Oh.
And the moments before the kind of most intense and concentrated experience of competition in someone's life, which is something that you are better familiar with than basically anyone else, or certainly as much as anyone else in the world. So my question is, going back to the Olympic Games where you won gold, those moments, let's say right before the 100 meter, right, or any of the other competitions that make up the decathlon, those moments as you were kind of tensed at the starting line just before competition, what's that like? Is there kind of a unique experience to it mentally, physically? What are those last countdown moments in your head? What's that experience like?
Well, let me paint the picture. Before you walk out into the Olympic game kind of stadium, the London Stadium, I think, had like 80,000 people. The Rio Stadium, I think, held like 50 or 60. And you're in the tunnel. You're underneath the stadium. And you had just basically been there since maybe 6 a.m. It's probably 9. You've been there a few hours. You were warming up, and all your other competitors are kind of around doing the same thing as you. You have your country kit on, which you put that on kind of like in the hotel room, and you're just like, okay, that to me is when the transformation happens. Like, it's kind of like go time. But during that warm up, it's very robotic. You're just like, this is what I do. I know what I'm doing. I go through my process. And then you're sitting in this call room, like right before you walk out. You get your bib number, kind of the ushers are moving about. And basically you sit around for like an hour and you just wait. And you have everything on and you're ready. And you can hear in this tunnel, you kind of like walk out with everybody. If you're in lane 5, there's like 4 other people in front of you and they're your competitors. And you're like, these guys are big. These guys are fast. And you hear the murmur of the crowd, and you can hear the announcer kind of faintly talking about like the event that's about to come up, which is your event. The things that are going through my mind are, am I going to do good? Is my body going to perform the way that it has before? Or is something like all of a sudden just going to not work? Like all these kind of irrational things, like, am I going to slip? Is somebody else going to have like an incredible day and I'm going to be like shocked and not know how to respond? Just all this stuff within, seconds, just looping. And at the same time, you're trying to just slow it down and remember that you are supposed to be here and you are good and you have prepared. So it's like this constant fight of worry and anxiety against confidence and I know I'm ready. And as you as they call out the first person, in lane 1 is so-and-so, you're just like getting more nervous and you're trying to deal with yourself and try to calm yourself down. And it's just like internal chaos. And you're doing all kinds of stuff. You're like pacing back and forth. You're like wiping your face, like doing anything you possibly can to get your body regulated, I guess, and figure out how to deal with this. And then I remember when my name was called and I can kind of see the sun shining through kind of this tunnel, and I go out and I hear my name called and I walk out and I kind of do the wave and the crowd kind of just like bubbles up. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps now, but it's like all that for some reason just shuts off and you just totally transform, or I just totally transformed to this mode of I am going to do this. Like and it's not like I say that, it's just my body just does it. Mind gone, body on. But there's also this kind of like awe, if you will. Like, I can't believe this is all for me and for us. You know, when you hear that many people like shouting or those many voices in concert for something you're about to do, and you're just like, why is this for me? Like, why do people like this? This is crazy. And so cool. Like you stand in the stadium and you're like, we build monuments to this stuff. And how am I a part of it? So it's a lot.
Ashton, first of all, you're giving me goosebumps. And number two, you might have given the most, like, I would say, evocative and visceral explanation of what it means to be at that -1, like, starting block figure, like, that I've ever heard. I might repeat this to all new SPC members, actually, just to kind of provide that evocative viscerality.
Yeah, the mind gone, body on is a really excellent turn of phrase for that experience where, like, there's some automatic system that has to take over in order to achieve what you're about to do. And that's probably where, like, all of the training kicks in, right? And it's actually the next question I have, which is, were there things that you did in your athletic career or even in, like, the days leading up to these specific events in order to prepare yourself for that transition, in order to specifically prepare for the kind of mental tension before an event, or to prepare yourself to go mind gone, body on?
Yeah. This is the essence of training. Training is an analogy for practice, is an analogy for getting your reps in, is an analogy for just putting yourself in that position over and over to learn. I mean, it's an analogy for learning, really. And so, by the time I got to, let's say, London 2012, I had gone through years of competitions at various levels that helped me learn the things necessary to be successful in that moment or in those moments. Very interestingly, when I had just become a professional athlete in 2011, the year before, I went to the World Championships in Daegu, South Korea. All the same people are there. It's just like the Olympic Games for a track and field athlete. It's just a track and field only, though. Because I was inexperienced, because it was kind of like my first large global competition, I didn't actually know how to deal with that situation. And I walked out and I screwed up, basically. I got nervous. I got scared. I couldn't deal with it. I didn't perform very well. I went to the next event, the long jump after that. I also didn't perform very well. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think you had the capacity to win those events?
I think I did.
Had you been like mentally prepared?
Yeah, I just mentally was not prepared to handle the stadium and the environment and my own internal pressure of performing well because I was at this level now. Like, if you go to the Olympic Games and you're supposed to win and you want to win versus going there and you're like 11th that you're going to see if you can get like 9th or move up the form chart, it's very different. And so at the Olympic Games in London, it's like, this dude's supposed to win. And I knew I could win. Same thing at the World Championships beforehand. I knew I could win. On paper, I was kind of supposed to win, and I just didn't know how to deal with that effectively. So I ended up getting second in that competition. And I remember sitting behind the podium to get my medal. And they call it the third place. And I'm standing behind the second place podium. And I'm actually very elated This is my first global medal as a professional athlete. And I'm like, oh my God, I got a medal. And I'm looking behind the second place podium and I'm like, I'm about to walk up on this thing. Like, this is insane. This is crazy. This is like, you know, in ancient times, like athletes dreamed of stuff like this. And I'm like, if this feels that good, I remember sitting there and I just looked over at the first place one, just, 6 inches higher. And I was like, if this feels that good, I wonder what that feels like. And right then, I kind of went through every mistake I had made to keep me kind of from getting that to getting this. And I was like, I'm not going to make those mistakes again.
Did you think back to that when you were at the Olympics?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Oh, my goodness. So I remember sitting behind the Olympic podium in London, looking at the first place one. Oh, and this probably was the best moment, Jonathan. And then I shifted over to the second place one. And I thought, I did it. I did what was necessary to go from there to here.
Would you agree that on the whole, right, that this environment, this feeling of kind of like being amongst greatness, of like being amongst talent, actually brings out the best in all these athletes over the course of the 2 weeks of the Olympics?
100%. I mean, when you just pass somebody in the village or in the dining hall or hold the door open, you're like, that might be one of the best athletes ever, right there. And you see this sense of, I just remember constantly learning, like understanding what you just said. These athletes are the best that country or this planet has produced in whatever it is they're doing. And you just automatically want and need to rise to that level. And even myself kind of going in my sport as one of the favorites, I just felt honored to be among them and also wanting to respect kind of this environment and these people and those things and represent it well, if that made sense. Like represent elite athletes well, represent being an Olympian well. And I think that means kind of not just your performance, but your character and, how you deal with challenges and that kind of stuff. And so it just wouldn't be like by default, these people have been selected or have earned that because they have the tools necessary to be there. And you just automatically, when you're in that environment, either rise to it or don't. And, I think that contributes a lot to the pressure, which athletes try to dissipate by humanizing ourselves in a lot of ways or doing a lot of self-deprecation.
By pretending you're not actually the best in the world and competing at a game that literally has a direct connection to Greek gods.
Yeah, I mean, all the strategies necessary to make it not seem actually what it is, which is, it's you're the best.
Yeah, actually, I was wondering, is it different than like the World Championships, right? Where you are also surrounded, like you said, by the same people, at least in your sport, right? Is the pressure associated with the Olympic Games specifically different than other high-level competitions?
It is. It is. And the reason is because, and this is like maybe like a very weird answer, but I believe in like objective way, it's economic. This is a very rare thing, and rare things that are sought after have value. And so it's very valuable to be an Olympian or an Olympic medalist, more so than a world champion, at least track and field. And not only is it rare, but I think there's also historical context of value. Like, so, I kind of liken it to gold. Like, why is the shiny rock kind of valuable to folks? We determined, had certain properties that we liked and have been using it for decades or for millennia for certain reasons. It's kind of like the same thing, I think, as being an Olympian. Even though silver and all these other things kind of come along.
It's just scarcity. It's all just about scarcity.
100%. Yeah. So it's I don't want to distill it to being like, oh, it's like,
and narratives. It's the story of the thing.
And
right. Exactly. And I mean, you hit on a very good point. Somebody told me that made this powerful. Everybody who makes it to the Olympic Games has 1,000 reasons why they shouldn't be there. So this ability to overcome whatever's coming your way, or has come your way in your life to get to this point. Because the other ones didn't make it. It's like manifest destiny. Everybody's going west. Like a lot of people didn't make it. And the ones that overcame and made it, for whatever reason, that's also what makes it valuable and scarce and rare and important.
I mean, the analogy here to a startup that manages to survive for the first few years is so apt, because when I think about at least the startups that I've been involved with, Facebook, Dropbox, Flipkart, and obviously the companies out of South Park Commons, I'm like, there are 100 reasons why this startup should have died, should have essentially like folded, should have been crushed by a bigger competitor. But somehow they persevere. There's adversity. Like in spite of that, they kind of like managed to make it through. And here's the weirdness, right? Like here's a paradox almost, which is that in some ways, when you look at some of these successful companies and founders, you're like, there's a part of your brain which is like, yeah, obviously they were going to make it. Like failure was not an option for them. They were going to figure it out because that's just who they are. Yeah. But on the flip side, you also want to be objective and you're like, but all the odds were stacked against it because this is very hard. So it's kind of this weird paradox that I don't quite know if I know how to explain even to myself, but it's certainly something I've thought about quite a bit.
I think it's the human story. So the story is in those, the hero's journey, the overcoming of the things to reach that. And the reason that they do, we've called it various things throughout time, but like the it factor, or they just got it, or like you can tell. And I think it's just this human, I don't know if it's like a subconscious thing, at least in sport, where you're just like, that person has got it. They are in the situation and there's just more confidence that they're going to be able to do it. And the way they move their body, like the subtle things that we pick up, that tell us that person or that team has the right stuff. They don't always do it, but you're just like, man, they've got something that the other people don't, and I'm going to bet on them, because of that. So, and I think maybe that's like a lot of what investing is really, you kind of like grok about, what is this kind of, what are these people made up of? Because you can see all the objective stats. Oh yeah, I see their 100 time. Oh yeah, I see their balance sheet, like whatever. But in the end, you want to be, I think you just kind of want to see them like when the chips are down, when the lion is at like the entrance to the cave and you've got your kids, like, what are they going to do? And it's, maybe it should be studied more. I don't know. It's because
you'd appreciate this, Ashton, which is that, obviously, as you know, I'm a huge football or soccer fan, and I was just reading up about Pep Guardiola, who's probably the most famous soccer coach of our generation, coached Barcelona, then Bayern Munich, now Manchester City, and just kind of a genius, right? And he was talking about how, for him, seeing the body language of his players when they are down, when they're 1-0 down or 2-0 down, that is the most telling thing about whether or not he thinks his team is ready to actually like achieve great things. And he's like, because they know all the skills. Most of them know the skills. Most of them are physically pretty fit. But like from a body language perspective, how they carry themselves in the face of that adversity. And I think that when I think about at least, our role as investors, when we invest, like when Jonathan and I invest in a company, like everything is like so early, people have an idea. Most of the people we talk to are talented, but at least what I'm looking for is like, do they have that almost like quiet confidence in them, maybe sometimes loud confidence in themselves and in their ability to kind of like navigate any situation. And that comes as a result of training. That comes as a result, I think, of like having learned from adversity. But it emanates from some set of people that like, hey, I will be able to figure this out. Even if I don't know it, I'll just figure it out, right? And, my hope with SPC is that we give people, it's not just that we identify that talent coming in, but that we allow people to also build it when they're in SPC, that like, hey, figure out what you're good at and just be like confident about it, that you are one of the world's best at it, right? Like you don't need anybody's permission to be good at it.
Yes. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about my coaches and good versus bad versus great coaches. And it's almost just like being an athlete. Like the more reps you have, the more athletes you coach, the more you get feedback from who those athletes are, or the characteristics that kind of make up the athletes that can do it and figure it out when the chips are down. The more reps you have at that, the better you're going to get at identifying that and making those teams. And I was just thinking about you guys and like how many people you see come through. Like you're getting a lot of reps as an investor, but also at South Park Commons. And it might start, maybe this is where, the good investors are, like being able to identify things just by way of being around it more. And you also bring up an interesting kind of, an important topic on the coaches. Like I didn't get there by myself. Somebody had to believe in me at the start. It's very easy to not believe in yourself, but when somebody else does believe in you, you're like, okay, well, maybe there's something to that. Especially if they've coached other people who are great. You're kind of like, okay, I'm going to start maybe believing what this person says. But identifying talent and like, it's like maybe a whole nother talk. It's a fascinating and a very important part of the success of athletes, founders. I think anybody's successful, really.
So thinking about identifying kind of your own talent, how did you discover about yourself that you could be like the best decathlete in the world? Was it something that, is it correct to characterize it as a discovery, or is it more correct to characterize it as a development, something more intentional, or like what is the balance between those two perspectives on finding this out about yourself?
How do I put this? For me, it was a question and a curiosity. I think that motivated the development. For me, I obviously was like interested in sport, and I got involved in sport in school, and I kept getting put in situations that would basically challenge that ability. Let's say in high school, it's like I wasn't always winning, but I tried to win. And eventually by the time I was a senior, I was winning. And then I got to college. It was a new level. I started over. Like I wasn't winning. I tried to win. And eventually by the end, I was winning. And so, to me, that is like, I feel like it's kind of a development and a discovery. And I didn't know what I was capable of. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be the best. I know I can do these things. I was just kind of like, I have no idea what I can do. Like I keep actually surprising myself. It's like, I'm actually getting faster. That's craziness. Like I'm getting stronger. Like how strong can I be? I don't know. You just kind of keep going along. Or I just kind of kept going along. And you again, I keep using this word a lot. It's a paradox because you seek that which you don't want, which is the limit. That's the question. What is the limit? It's like, I don't know. I keep going. Like, what? And I believe that is a discovery. You are trying to discover, and in order to discover, you have to develop. And, this is not just true for, I think, a single athlete or a single person, but you look at the timeline of humanity on the whole. Use a sport as an analogy. It's like the times keep getting faster, the heights keep getting higher, and it's like that. I think is actually why people love watching sport, because subconsciously we're like, we don't want the human race to be done getting better, and we need that performance to give us the joy in understanding that we are still getting better. We haven't found the limit. We're seeking the limit. We're going to space. We're doing all these things. We're like, what is the limit is the question. In order to find, the only way to answer that question is to kind of keep pushing for it.
There's something,
you won't find it.
Yeah, exactly. There's something very poetic about that. It's like you are driven to find something that you dread finding. Yeah. But in that drive, like, comes the expansion of what you are capable of.
My analogy for this is an MMO, a massive multiplayer online game, where it's like you join the game and it's like, hey, level 50, and then they keep coming out with an expansion pack that opens on a new world, and and you're like, oh, now it's level 75 and I can like go into this new zone. Like if you get dropped into this game as a player, you're like a level 1 and you're kind of like, what's going on? And then you like get to level 75 and you're like, oh, I'm at the end. Expansion pack comes out and you're like, oh, there's level 85 and there's new stuff and new zones and new skills. And like, and the question that you have is like, what's the point of the game? And it's like, well, you have to keep playing it to find out. And hopefully it goes beyond like level 100 and level 101, 102. And I feel like this is how I approach sport and kind of like how I approach life. It's like, you're playing the game. You actually want to explore all the game and learn everything there is that the game has to offer. But you also kind of you're trying to get to the end. But when you get to the end, when it's like, hey, level 200, no more expansion packs, it's like, then what do you do?
You have to, it's like you have to approach an infinite game.
You want it
if
to
it is
be
a
an
finite
infinite
game.
Yeah.
Or you want it to be it.
I think you want it to be an infinite, like basically you just want to keep getting better.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, this is a good segue. I mean, wow, so many thoughts going through my head. But I would argue that, and I would probably put myself, I don't have 2 Olympic gold medals, but I've tried to do a bunch of different things in my life. And I have found that as soon as I am approaching maybe kind of the limit of my own, maybe like accomplishments or ability in a particular game, I try to find a new game to play, right? I want to go back and reset myself to feeling like a beginner. And then I kind of try to go through the whole journey. And that's also, I think, I've never actually articulated it that way, but I think that's also why I love SPC, because it allows you to kind of like go back to the starting point, feel like a beginner, and then start like, hey, like what is a new game that you want to get better at, right? Like find your limits again. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, this is, I think, a key part of like, the SPC story.
This is exactly what I did when I left sport. I got to the limit. I got to, I guess, the level that I was like, I don't know if I want to find out if there's more levels in this game.
Yeah, before you switch gears, I have one question, if that's okay. I really want to try to understand this from Ashton, that I think a lot about. Why do some people, and some, whether it's founders, athletes, or maybe just like, people why do some people actually have more belief in what like they can do than others, regardless of their talent level? Like some people are just like, oh yeah, like this thing, I can keep on doing a lot more. Like they seem to actually just have almost like delusional belief in themselves,
Yes,
relative to other people who maybe cap themselves. And, we were talking to a guest, earlier this week about a similar kind of, I would say, like, where does that almost, like, how do you inculcate that belief in people? Is it just a case of foundational childhood experiences? Like, is a strategy for raising my child that I should make them feel that they can do anything? Because that way, maybe, like, they will now believe that they can do anything in the future.
I'm not sure about others. For me, it's not necessarily, well, in sport, for example, it started out as a lot of doubt. And I think at the beginning, I was talking about how much I doubted myself, even when I was in the position to be the best. And because I had a lot of signal and a lot of learnings from sport over the years, it's very comparative. Competition is inherent in kind of like life and nature, and sport highlights that. Because I had so much competition, I did well. I was building confidence, and I think I had more belief in that. But after leaving sport, I was kind of reset like you. If I'm going to go do this new thing in tech and engineering, which I have like basically zero experience in, I didn't really have a lot of belief in myself, really. I was like, I don't know what I can do. And it was back to the beginning, very similar to sport, kind of asking that question. My approach is to ask, what am I capable of? And to find out, I kind of go to the next best, like the next closest level. It's like, can I put myself in an environment like SPC with talented people that have already kind of done things, so I can learn, like, what have they done? It reminded me of kind of going to college and being around people who are high level, helping me raise my level. And then it's like, can I go to a startup and actually like be a functional, productive person? And like, what are my skills and what is the talent that I have in this area? Can I go learn engineering, kind of be able to build things? So, it's, and I think the more you go through those things in different fields, even maybe the more belief you have. I have seen people with just default, like, I can do it and I'm going to go try to do it. But I think in general, it's this willingness. This reminds me of when I did martial arts. The martial arts instructors used to ask me to do things I didn't think I could do. Hey, before we can teach you anything, you have to do 100 push-ups. And I'm like 7 years old. It's like, I've never done 100 push-ups. Hey, we need you to do wind sprints on gravel, bare feet, before you can like get to your next level. And I was like, and so this person asked me to do things I didn't think I could do, and then I ended up doing them, gave me the understanding, like, maybe I can, I just have to try. And so I think people that I've seen with this kind of thing you're talking about have that, the willingness to try, the willingness to figure it out, and not like the fear or reservation about like not doing it.
Some people definitely do just have that like inherent, as Aditya put it, self-delusion.
This guy.
that might have been, a referential point or self-referential point. But it's interesting that you put it, like, other people, you can essentially achieve it if you are just willing to ask the question, what am I capable of? Right? Maybe you don't believe that you are capable of something, but if you are at least willing to go looking for it, to go looking for the limit, then you'll find out.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
well, let's.
You won't.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or you find the terrifying limit that you have been fearing.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that transition that you made that you've referenced, right?
Yeah.
A big part of the reason that you joined SBC is that you were leaving athletics and looking to figure out what was next. So take us back to 2016. You've won gold at Rio. It's your second gold medal. Did you know then that you would be retiring? Did you, like, going into those games, did you anticipate you'd be retiring afterwards? What was the process that finally led to the decision, time to retire from professional athletics and figure out what's next?
At Rio, I subconsciously knew that I wasn't going to do another year of competition, whether it was Olympics or World Championships. I knew for sure it wasn't going to be another Olympics. I wasn't going to do another 4 years. And the reason... And then finally, after, like, the day after competition, people are like, are you going to Tokyo? My media response was, there's less than a 50% chance. Like, not like big basically. And the reason, there were several, but one, I had done stuff in sport. I had pursued my limits in this domain as far as I wanted to try to take them. And I was very interested in other areas of the world. And I kind of saw sport as this inspirational piece, kind of the stuff that we talked about. But the material world was built by people who build things, and those are the people that I admired as an athlete, and I wanted to be. If I could choose or try to do something else with my life, it would be to build things in the world for others and continue progress in a different way, like societally, but from like a civilization aspect. And so, to me, I was like, what does that the best? Historically and currently is like science and technology. And after Rio, I was like, okay, I want to get involved in that. And I was just older and I was getting hurt more. And so the sport thing was done. My approach was, seek out people who have done things in these areas. This is kind of something I learned from sport, which is find the A players, put yourself in the environment with talented people, and you can learn quickly. And so that just led to a lot of networking and a lot of reaching out, and also deciding where to actually physically be. At the time, I lived in Eugene, Oregon, not exactly the hub of science and technology development. And it was very clear that San Francisco was the place to be. And so, a year after Rio, my wife and I moved to San Francisco. Didn't know anyone. We found our apartment because we had a dog and it was like near dog parks. And we're like, okay, this is where we're going to be. And now what? But after emails and calls, I got introduced to South Park. And I think after spending like 2 days walking through that door, it was evident even from sport, it was like nothing I had experienced really. It was like being in the Olympic Village, where everybody was in the Olympic Village, even though everybody's like a really good athlete, they're all still kind of like should we talk to each other? You know, is this like, you know, do I want to talk to my competitor, or do I want to like sit at lunch with this person? It was the opposite of that. It was like, come on over and learn about decentralized finance. I was like, and you know, what are you interested in? It was just this unbelievable. And so that, you know, that being in a -1 zone, phase in life alone is hard. And, being in that with others was like so helpful. And so that's where I started. And, from there, I just learned a bunch about my talents and interests, what the world at large was kind of trending toward. And I just chose, you know, to go.
Do you have any, having gone through this now, do you have any advice first for other athletes actually who are transitioning out or who are considering it in particular? And then do you think that advice is transferable to people generally, or is there like any specific advice that is much more useful for athletes?
You know, I was kind of flippant about this, but that transition of like just choosing where to move and when and to actually move and to get out of the thing that I was very comfortable doing. Because a lot of people are like, hey, are you going to go coach? Or are you going to do something in sport? And I was just like so done because I'd experienced a lot of it. I was ready for something else, but it was scary because my whole network had no really visceral connection with the thing that I was seeking. Science and tech startups. What? You know, you're an athlete. And it was hard and scary. And I think my advice would be kind of like we talked about, that going through that struggle and that challenge is like, if you can push yourself through that and put yourself in the uncomfortable zone and be in that place to reach out and do what it takes to get into that environment with A players. I think you've already kind of gone from like level 1 to level 2 of being on your way to get to that zero moment. So my advice would be not to sit back and make a perfect plan, but your plan should be to kind of move as quickly as possible to get to a place where you can start development, if that makes sense. Because it basically like sitting around in your apartment, kind of like, you know, what should I do, is not helpful. I think it's about getting out into the world and being around the people who are building stuff or who are actually asking those same questions. That's where you learn. You know, I could sit on, here's an analogy. I could like sit on YouTube and try to figure out how to pole vault, or I can like basically go out into pole vault practice, grab a pole and kind of be like, how do I do this thing? But I think maybe the reason it's scary to do that, it's something you don't know, is there's a lot of reasons. Like, what are people going to think of me? Am I going to be good? Like all these questions that just come with being a beginner again. And my advice, man, it would just be to like, you're asking yourself to do something you don't think you can do. And you just have to trust in doing that, because on this journey, you're going to be trying to attempt many things that you don't think you can do. And so if you can do this one, you kind of can keep doing the other ones. So hopefully that's helpful. I mean, I think that's like the minimum advice I would give. I don't know. What would your guys' advice be? I mean, you're pros.
It's kind of what you said, right? It's in particular for athletes, Ashton. I think that there's a lot in terms of the journey that they've been on, of essentially like training, practice, being around other elite athletes, that I think as like a meta framework for approaching any new thing applies like 100%, right? Yeah. And obviously, I think that, you know, I personally think, you know, in machine learning, there's this idea of transfer learning, right? Which is that you basically are able to transfer a set of like approaches and frameworks that you've learned in one discipline and to apply to another discipline. I think transfer learning actually works for humans in their endeavors as well. And but it's hard because you become good at one thing and then you assume that the rest of the world is super complicated in this other thing. So you need to have that initial burst of confidence that like, no, actually the approaches are similar. By approaching mastery in one field, I have the core ability to go and try to do it for something else. I would say one big piece of, advice I would give is find a training, find a gym, a training camp, a community like SPCA, because I think it just makes it a lot easier. I think we fool ourselves that, like YouTube and the internet is sufficient. I think they're awesome, but I think actually going out there, getting high bandwidth connectivity to real humans in person makes a huge difference. So find your first 5-10 people, at a place like SPC or somewhere else. I think it makes a huge difference. But again, I think this is actually, part of the reason why we're doing this podcast is so we can actually like talk to people from various disciplines and hopefully to show the similarities that like people have across greatness, and then essentially tell people that you can actually do this in multiple fields as long as you kind of like have the right, I would say, frameworks and approaches. So, I want to say like, thank you so much, by the way. This conversation today has left me both like inspired and also just like, I think, pretty grateful that we get the chance to build something at SPC to learn from people like yourself, but also like encouraged about the future in the sense that I think we're building something that could be really useful to a lot of people. And I think hearing from you kind of like, through your experiences has even given me maybe like some more confidence and inspiration today.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. I mean, being part of this is an honor because you guys are high performers, and you're the elite athletes and the elite coaches, I think, of the science and technology world. So it means a great deal to me to even be able to chat, but also to have that valuable experience that I had to kind of set me on my way.
Thank you so much, Ashton.
We appreciate you joining us today. It was really fun talking to you, and we're excited to see what you do next.
Thank you.